Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. Welcome to a
Salam.
very interesting episode where we going back to not just through our imagination, but we're also going to be seeing pictures and maps of the Sirah, perhaps things we've never seen before. My name is Sadiq, and I'm very honored to have Ustaz bin Imad Al-Atiqi from Kuwait. Ahlan wa sahlan, Ustadi. Welcome to this program of ours.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Barakallah feek. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Many of us are lovers of the Sirah. We read about it. And although you have a lot of books behind you, you believe that there's a need for seeing Sirah, seeing the map, seeing the pictures. Why is that? Why is it so important, Ustadana?
Uh, Visually, people retain more information when they receive it both visually. So when you have a visual presentation, you're getting both the audio and the visual impact, and also gives more clarity and provides a better context through which to understand these events. And in some cases, they actually shed new light on understanding these events. So I think it's very important to have a clear depiction of the topographical and geographical context, which also leaks into the social context and understanding the events of the Sirah.
No. Now we honored because Ustaz bin Yamad has been researching the Sirah for almost close to 2 decades. He's originally from Kuwait, having graduated from the Royal Military Academy in Great Britain, and he has a degree in media and communications from the American University of Kuwait. He's one of the foremost authorities on Mecca's topography and geography at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We've been having a lot of great discussions just before this recording began, and I'm benefiting a lot from our online and offline discussions with Study. And he's contributed to major Islamic landmark projects commissioned by the government of Saudi Arabia. He's the co-founder of SirahMaps.com, a very interesting website. I was exploring it today. It's a home to a series of exclusive interactive maps detailing the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the author of several Islamic books, Mecca and the Time of the Prophet Muhammad, an illustrated reference with maps of key homes, mountains, and other landmarks. He's also performed and spoken at TED Talks in Kuwait, resurrecting pre-Caliphate Mecca. And I also hear a study that your 5-volume Sirah book is coming out soon. Is that correct? Can you tell us a
But
bit about that?
I began. That's actually the seed from which the book Mecca at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam began. So I wanted to write a very detailed, contextualized biography, which adds a lot of the missing parts that were deemed unimportant early on. So early on, the focus was mostly on battles and major events, but there's a lot of context that can be added. And as I built that, that's when I saw the need for having a very clear map for people to follow these events and contextualize them. So that's how that began. And it
Wow.
grew from 1 volume, and now it's about 5 volumes.
Now, Ustad, when we say Sirah, we think of Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, or in the English sources more popularly, we have books like Martin Ling's. Many have read Karen Armstrong's Sirah book. The most we can understand is some hills are described in those books, and the rest is our imagination. People like myself, perhaps it's to do with the movie The Message or the series on the life of Sayyidina Omar that was produced recently a few years ago, or our experiences when we go to Umrah. But you're saying and you're claiming that there's much more information out there. And today you're going to show us things about the house of Khadijah, for example, Dar Khadijah.
Yeah,
First of all, how about we go into it? How about you take us through it, show us what your research has shown? And I love these maps. Personally, I had some problems understanding some apparently contradictory hadith. Last year or 2 years ago, we had a major Sirah maps. It was about Hani. When I saw her house, how close it was to the Haram, it solved the problem I had about two potentially contradictory narrations. It was about the Miraj. So
right.
I'm benefiting myself as a student of Sirah. So show us something about that. Let's begin with our mother Khadijah radiallahu anha's house. That's where it all began. Nubuwwat began there. Where was this house? Whereabouts in Mecca? And then towards the end, I'll ask you, where do you get this information? How confident are we? But let's first see it. وَلَيْسَ الْخَبَرُ كَالْمُعَايَنَةِ. So first show
Right.
us and then we'll discuss it, inshallah.
Sure, Bismillah ar-Rahim. I'm actually very quite excited about this topic. I'm very passionate about it. You did mention some of the sources, such as Ibn Ishaq. And just quickly, I want to point out that we also have now this slightly older source for the Sirah by Maghazi Musa bin Uqba. Sorry, the Maghazi of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by Musa bin Uqba. And that's a very important source that was believed to be lost. And it was recently found and published. So that's just one more source about the Sirah.
I think even last year an English translation of that came out as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I think they when I purchased the Arabic version, it was just published, I think, only last year or the year before.
Yes,
they should have it in English now. But yeah, I'm very passionate about this topic. So yeah, let's go ahead and let me go ahead and share my screen because
now while we're doing that, so you're going to tell us about the Dar Khadijah. While you're preparing your screen, what is this thing about Dar and Bayt? Maybe just some basics, if you can tell us the difference, and then show us the map, inshallah. Now,
yes, gladly. In fact, that's something I will be definitely getting into, the distinction between Dar, Bayt, and also Menzil. And inshallah, I'm going to be covering that topic because that is a misconception, even for contemporary Arab speakers. So I'm kind of sharing the screen now. I don't know if it's already. There
yes,
we go.
I'm beginning to see it. Yep. Okay, I can see it.
Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So first of all, let's orientate ourselves. I hope the mouse. I tried to make the mouse larger. North is to the right. North is to the right of the screen here, and that's simply because an elongated valley shows better on the screen. The area we want to focus on is this area where the Bekka Valley was, just over here where you can see in the square. We also be covering the Sha'b Bani Hashim or Sha'b ibn Hashim. Sorry, Sha'b Bani Hashim, also sometimes called Sha'b Abdul Muttalib. And zooming in to get further orientation, we have Mount Marwa, Mount Safa, and between them is the Mas'a path. So anybody who's gone to Mecca and did the rituals of Hajj or Umrah, they would be very familiar with this. We also have Mount Abu Qubais, which at the time was more commonly called Jabal al-Amin. And like I said earlier, this is Sha'b Bani Hashim. So we're going to be discussing this. When we talk about Khadijah anha and where she lived, let's discuss first where she lived before her marriage to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So to the top left corner here, we have her father's estate, Khuwaylid from the Bani Asad clan of the Quraysh. So we have, by the time the Sirah events took place, her father had passed away. And the southern side was controlled by her nephew, Hakim bin Hizam, radiallahu anh. And the northern side, over here, was controlled by, eventually fell under the hands of Zubayr bin Awam, so he ended up inheriting this property, but initially belonged to his father, and after his father passed away, was controlled for a short period by his uncles until they passed away. What's important to point out here is this house on the side of Hakim bin Hizam's portion, which is where Khadijah anha was engaged to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, on this estate was divided into two parts. There was a wall, and within this wall there was a gate. If you pass through this gate, you would be faced directly to your right with the house where Khadijah radiallahu anha was engaged to the Prophet. Before her marriage to the Prophet, however, she was married to, if you see the top right, we see Abu Hal al-Nabash bin Zurara of Bani Tamim. Now, Bani Tamim were not part of Quraysh, but he was a highly respected nobleman within his own tribe, and he moved to live in Mecca as an ally of the Quraysh, specifically of Bani Abd al-Dar. And she was married to him, and she gave birth to several of his children. We can go through the children of Khadijah later on, maybe during question time. After his death, she not long after, she married Atiq bin A'ad of Bani Makhzum, and then she would have lived with him on his estate. Now, very interestingly, the Bani Makhzum clan controlled the lesser Ajyad and greater Ajyad valleys. So that's their original dwellings. But through inheritance issues in Jahiliyyah, this was dominated by the Mughira, Bani Mughira branch of the Bani Makhzum, from which you know, obviously, Al-Walid ibn Mughira, the wealthiest man in Mecca at the time, and his very famous son, Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu anhu. So eventually we had, and due to this disparity in inheritance, a lot of the other households of Bani Makhzum began to pour out, and we can discuss why that happened and how it happened. But that's where she lived with her husband from the Bani Makhzum. After his death, she would have gone back to live on her father's estate, and this continued to be the case until her marriage to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, before we discuss where they lived together, it's an opportunity now to discuss where the Prophet lived where he lived. So this is the estate of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the house where he was born. His next door neighbor was Abu Talib on this side, and to his north was Al-Abbas radiallahu anh, and then Al-Muqawwim and Abu Lahab and so on. And critically, we have Hamza radiallahu anh living in this area. What I want to mention here is that the Prophet obviously was an orphan when he was born. His father had passed away. His mother took care of him, and then he was taken care of by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. After Abdul Muttalib passed away, he was cared for by, again, his uncle, Abu Talib, who lived right next door, until he was old enough to control his own estate and manage his own affairs. So this is where the Prophet lived, and he continued to own the estate all the way up until migration in 621, first year Hijrah. After that, his next door neighbor, by then Abu Talib had passed away, and Aqil radiallahu anh, before he had embraced Islam, took the opportunity when the Prophet migrated. Like all the Muslims, they began to lose their properties who migrated. So their closest of kin or their clans would seize those properties, sometimes even selling them. So Aqil bin Abi Talib seized this property, and now it became just one large estate and joined it to his. After that, the property...
Is that why, Ustadi Ma'adir, is that why when the Prophet comes for the conquest of Mecca, he's staying in a tent and he goes, Aqil has not left us anywhere? You know?
Yes, exactly. That is why. And that's also why when the companions just saw that the Prophet did not try to repossess his properties that were seized, they too felt embarrassed to ask for the properties back. So a lot of the seized properties continued to be controlled by those who had seized them. So that, yes, that's exactly why.
Yeah, subhanAllah. It was only like 8 years ago. They could have really claimed it.
Yes,
but I guess
subhanAllah.
at that maybe. Okay.
And
Just a question: why isn't the Banu Hashim? I mean, this is really amazing. Weren't the Hashemites the leaders of the Quraysh, and wouldn't they be expected to be closer to the Kaaba, but they're quite far from what it looks like? Or maybe farther houses are better?
So the division of the estates, or the initial proper division of the different various clans for Quraysh, this was established by Qusay bin Kilab when he took over Mecca from the Khuza'ah, who had controlled it for almost 500 years. So when he took this, he divided the valley between the various clans, and that's where they ended up living. And in fact, before them, nobody wanted to build in the heart of the valley for two reasons. They were out of respect for the Kaaba. They thought that they shouldn't, basically build within that valley. And also another reason that is often missed, sometimes you'd have major floods that pass through Mecca from the north to the south. So the best properties were not necessarily in the center, but then they became so during the time of Quraysh. So that's with regards to that.
Okay, shukran.
So continuing with the what happened to this estate, after Aqil took it over, we have a period not long after when the Ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, now we're talking about two brothers, Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi and his more famous and cruel and harsh Umayyad commander, Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. They purchased the entire estate and they divided it amongst themselves, with one portion for one brother, the family of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, another portion for the second brother, Muhammad ibn Yusuf, and a third portion for a cousin of theirs. However, they did not, out of respect to the prestige of the Prophet's birthplace, they did not touch the actual house in which he was born. So they thought that this is something that's off limits and they couldn't touch it. This continued to be the case until Al-Khayzuran bint Ata, who's the mother of the two caliphs, Musa al-Hadi and the famous Harun al-Rashid. She was a very charitable woman. So when she came to Mecca for Hajj, she often did charity works. In fact, she also, by the way, Dar al-Arqam, located here, was one of the things that she preserved and changed into the Masjid. So she purchased this birthplace house of the Prophet and then furnished it on the inside, made it into a masjid, like a prayer room, and allowed access to it from the main route that enters the valley here. So this became now, at this point, public property and no longer a private estate. And this was cared for, and you can see here's a key renovations that took place throughout time, all very carefully maintaining this house, all the way up until the Ottoman era, with the last being the Ottoman Caliph, the Ottoman Caliph Sultan Abdul Majid II, who also, by the way, was the same person in that same year, the last person to renovate Dar Khadijah, what became known as Dar Khadijah, which was her house originally. And we can now transition to talk about Dar Khadijah, because that's really where the Prophet lived during his prophethood, and where a lot of the seerah focuses. So Dar Khadijah is a very unique property. It is the only property that I found in the entirety of Mecca during that time period that contained its own private well. And this property Khadijah had purchased shortly before her marriage to the Prophet and furnished it to become their marital home. Now, this property originally belonged to Bani Abd Shams, and the Bani Abd Shams are further to the north, and their estates extended all the way down here into this area. Not originally belonging to them, this originally belonged to Bani Zuhra, but there's a long story of how they took over this area. And their patriarch of the Bani Abd Shams, Abd Shams bin Abd Manaf, he was the one who dug this well over here. And this Rum well basically, and when she purchased it, it became private property. Now, other clans also had wells. There were several wells throughout Mecca, but these were shared by the clan, and some were allowed to be public so that visitors to Mecca can benefit from them. Primarily Zamzam. Zamzam was a major one that the visitors to Mecca would use. So what happened to this property? Obviously, they controlled it all the way. They took it from Bani Abd Shams by purchase. They lived in it together until the Khadijah RA passed away. After Khadijah passed away, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ controlled this property. Again, the same that had happened with his birthplace property when he migrated in 622. This was seized by his next door neighbor here, Mu'attab bin Abi Lahab. So Abi Lahab lived here on his inherited property, but he had purchased this and lived in it for a short while before giving it to his son when his son got married. And seizing the opportunity, his son Mu'attab, this was before he embraced Islam, he took over this estate. This continued to be the case until Muawiyah when he was caliph. He purchased this property, which was next door to his father. So if we can point out where his father was located, this is the house and the property of Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan also controlled all this area here, and this area is called Bain al-Darain. What matters is this was the property that he lived on, and there was a gate opened between the two walls so that the family can enter and see this property.
So the Prophet was neighbors to Abu Sufyan in the Meccan era.
Yes, to his side that faced the Marwa, his neighbor was Abu Sufyan, who later embraced Islam and fought very bravely with the Muslims and actually lost both his eyes in battle in jihad. And then on the other side was Mu'attab, the family of Abu Lahab. So this was seized, and after it was seized, yes, we said not seized, and then after that was purchased by Muawiyah. And this Muawiyah added a masjid, and this is very important. By adding a masjid, he made it into public property. So he attached the masjid to it, being very careful, and the records are clear about this. He did not touch the actual house. He simply attached the masjid to it. After doing that, obviously became a public property again. And this is some of the key renovations that took place. And again, they ended with Sultan Abdul Majid II, who also renovated this Dar Khadijah at the time when he renovated the birthplace. Now you asked a very good question about Dar, Menzil, and we also should add Bait. So a key distinction between Dar, because people now use these terms interchangeably, but the early records are very precise and specific about which terminology to use. To completely simplify this, a Dar is an estate, a large estate. It could have walls around it or not, but it's a defined estate. So at minimum, a Dar contains two menzils, two homes. And at minimum, each home contains two bait. A bait is specifically a bedroom or a room with the four walls and a covering and a roof. And you get 2 or 3 of these to create a menzil and of course some cooking area. And that menzil and at least 2 menzils in a Dar. So that's just very simply to distinguish between the three terminologies. And I think that's a very good question and something important to understand. Looking into Dar Khadijah, so this is probably exclusive. I've never shared with, this is the first time it's being shared publicly. It's going to be published in the book. So this was the original blueprint of the actual house, not the full estate, but the house itself. This was the main house, this is the room, and this is the room where Fatima anha and the rest of her siblings and the children of the Prophet Muhammad and Khadijah anha were born. And you can see the room well located here. So this is what it looked like when the masjid was added. And very important to point out, we're talking about the same generation. So this masjid was added during the same generation. And this is important because in archaeology, although it's only been 1,000 years, but still the layers slowly begin to build up on the outside. So
when you mean the same generation, you mean like during the lifetime of Muawiyah? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, during the lifetime of the companions.
Okay.
So this was the masjid was added. And then after that, if you'll notice where this masjid was, this is its location over here. Now it was further expanded by the Abbasid Caliph al-Muttaqi Billah and al-Muqtadi Billah. And this became the new masjid. This is an open roof. And this is where their old masjid was located. Again, they maintained the shape and the renovation, but at this point, a dome was added here. Very interestingly, you'll notice there's a stable here added by the Abbasid Khalifa Ahmed al-Nasir. So what is this stable? So imagine a private parking lot, but instead of cars, you're looking at parking your camel or horse and paying a small fee. And these small fees were collected and used for the upkeep of the Dar Khadijah. Of course, major renovations required major efforts and more donations, and we saw a list of those earlier. So this is something that interesting that developed. After this period,
what place of concealment?
Oh, the place of concealment. That's a very good question. So this is where they believe the Prophet would hide, والسلام, when he was thrown with stones by his neighbors. So the pagans of Mecca would go to his neighboring houses, and they would throw stones at the Prophet and they try to hit him. So
inside his dar.
Yes, and so they're outside his property, but hurling stones at his house, trying to hit him. And this is called the place of concealment because it is believed by many that this is the room that he would go to hide in to avoid being hit by the rocks. There's also a small shelf here, which is in black. And it's almost like a slab that came out of the wall. Some people think he hid underneath it. That's what he used to hide underneath. But actually, this is more like a shelf in a house. It has utility purposes, basically. After this time period, we're looking at the Ottoman era. And the Ottomans basically took this and further expanded it, making it to more square. As you can see here, they expanded this room. They expanded this room to this side, but more or less they maintained this area. However, when al-Batnuni visited Mecca in 1909 and did his sketch, he had the misunderstanding of thinking that this large area must have been Khadijah's business area. And actually that's somewhere else, and we can get into ask me about that later. But so this is something that he understood.
Through your research study, you're also correcting some misunderstandings as well, it looks like.
Yes, these misunderstandings are not in the older records, but this is a misunderstanding that we noticed took place in 1909 when the Batnuni visited this place. Yes, and he basically speculated, this must have been her business area.
Who is this figure you mentioned?
He's amongst the many people who visited Mecca and took records. So he's a traveler, historian, and he wrote books, and he made the sketch of Dar Khadijah during the time when he visited Mecca. So very, very importantly, with regards to the upkeep of this property, so this was removed. The upper area. So when the Ottomans built this, they basically built the ground on a higher level. And what's important here is that we have a 1989 excavation of Mecca, of the Dar Khadijah. So when they're doing the Tawsi'at al-Haram, the expansion of the Haram to host more pilgrims, they were going to build on top of this area. So Ahmed Zaki Yamani, the esteemed Ahmed Zaki Yamani, mashallah, he pioneered an effort to excavate. He brought a team of archaeologists They worked around the clock for 3 shifts, day and night, to get to the base layer. And these are the exact measurements they had. In fact, we have photographs of these. And these are from his actually book, The House of Khadijah. Let me, if you'll excuse me. There we go. So this is the book, The House of Khadijah, which he published and recorded all the details of this effort. And you can see here the steps that went down, about 7 steps going down to the layer of Quraysh, at the time of Quraysh. And very interestingly, that they actually did try to dig way below this, and they found nothing, which is expected because nobody prior to Quraysh built inside the valley. And again, we can see more images, of this renovation. And now you understand the difference
So
between
those wall structures are there from the original building?
Yes, so this area here is specifically what we can see here. So this is the area the base layer that they reached to, below which there is nothing. And this perfectly matches the descriptions in the earlier records. So now we have a dig and photographs and an entire effort that revealed these foundations. And there's a whole history of how this took place, and it's detailed in the book. So yeah, and now we can see here this image next to this, and now you know the difference between a dar and the actual house and the location of the room well. So I think this basically gives us a good understanding of. Let me try to.
Wow, it's fascinating. I mean, to imagine the Prophet when you mentioned about the place of concealment, that's the house. Now, but again, Ustadi, how do we know that like, so as Ahmed Zaki al-Yamani, so that was always known as Dar Khadijah, and then the Saudis.
Yes, that's always been known. It's always been known. It was only removed during the.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we said the last excavation took place in 1924, 23, and less than a year later, the caliphate was abolished, and the third Saudi state was established. And King Abdulaziz, rahimahullah, so he did a great effort in coordination with an imam of Mecca at the time, Al-Abbas, to preserve the foundations, because there was a lot of pressure on the government by a lot of early scholars that there were practices being done around Dar Khadijah that were not appropriate. So out of fear, they removed the upper constructions, but this did not touch the base layer.
So when was that? When was it removed, the upper construction?
In 1924, as soon as
it was sort of knocked down, except for the base.
Yeah, they removed the domes on top and all that stuff.
I see.
And then what they did, Sheikh Abbas went to King Abdulaziz and said, "Please, let's do something about this." And they agreed, and he gave him a note, like a decree, that he has the rights to over these 2 properties, the birthplace property and Dar Khadijah. So what he did, he cleaned up the area, made sure he did not touch the foundations, put soft sand, purified soft sand on top of it, and then built on top of that a small structure that needed no foundations. So now we have a library on top of the Mawlid, which still exists today. And there was on top of this a Quran school on top of Dar Khadijah. And that protected the base until that excavation was made.
And how does it stand today, this area? Is the
this
library
area today? Yeah, this area now, this excavation took place when they were expanding the Masjid. So on top of that, we have prayer area. So the Haram has been expanded in a large way. So now on top of the area is a prayer, part of the prayer areas for the Haram. And we can look at that later on if you wish.
No, that's amazing. Okay. So now we can maybe look at how then on that map of Kaaba that you showed us, in Mecca, the valley with the houses, how does today's masjid, where does that fit, and the expansions? Can you maybe show us a bit of that?
Yeah, that's actually very important. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. So this is quite important.
By the way, just as a reminder to anyone watching us live, I can view some of the nice comments and feedback, but anyone who has specific questions, feel free to post it, and we can try to, I can shoot him to Ustaz bin Imad, and he can hopefully enlighten us. Now, Ustazi, tafadal.
Jazakallah khair. So what we're looking at here, so this is a map that, this is one of many maps that we have at sieramaps.com. But the point here is that we can go through the various expansions of the masjid. So this is the way it was during the Prophet era, and then during Umar ibn Khattab's expansion. So his expansion was mostly a cleanup job of things that had infringed on the tawaf, and then added walls with gates in them to the masjid. And these gates followed the main routes that already existed at the time. After that came the expansion by Uthman bin Affan, and you can see it's already taking its sort of a rectangular shape. Uthman bin Affan was the first person to add the arc design above the walls, above the gates of the masjid. And then came the expansion by Abdullah bin Zubair, and you'll notice now something very important. It's continuing to become more and more elongated. And the reason behind this is because they had to avoid this path over here. So this path was the valley flood path. So when you go down here, if you built this area over here, what's going to happen? First of all, the ground is not, they called it the belly of the valley flood path because it's the lowest part of the valley. And that's where the flood waters would go rush through as they entered Mecca from the north during the rainy season. So first of all, it's not suitable to be constructed upon. And secondly, they would block the floodwaters and you end up flooding the valley. So they avoided that. This continued to be a problem all the way up until the expansion by Al-Mansur, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. So you'll notice now the Kaaba is becoming even more and more less centralized within the masjid. Then came the Mahdi. So in his first expansion in 161, he only expanded towards the north. After that expansion, he looked at the masjid and it looked really distressing to him.
Ustad, you're an expert in history, but when you say then came the Mahdi, many of our listeners might think this is
the Abbasid Caliph Muhammad al-Mahdi. So when he took over and he did his first expansion of the masjid, he expanded on this side. And then you can imagine how lopsided the Kaaba was. This was not central. And then what he did is through a lot of pressure, because the engineers were against this, he said it must be done that we expand further towards this side. And so in 167, they expanded this side. And the way they got around this is that they dug a bypass route outside this area and filled in this segment of the old flood path and basically made the ground suitable for construction. Now, what's really important to point out here is that see this area of the masjid? We have meticulous records for each of these expansions and what took place and what was absorbed into it and so on. There were no further expansions to the inside of the masjid, the sahans or the courtyard of the masjid, all the way up until the first Saudi expansion. Now we're looking like well over 1,000 years ago. There were no further expansions. And here's what's important about this. First of all, except we have Dar Khadijah expansion and Bab Ibrahim expansion. But of course, these did not affect the actual inner courtyard. Now, why is this important?
One, sorry, that was done at the time of Al-Mahdi, Abu Ja'far. Is this like the bottom floor of the Kaaba that we see now in the mosque?
Yes, this area basically covers the entire courtyard of the masjid, which basically most of what it is there is still is. Although today we have further expansions to the masjid itself, especially on the outside.
But that's on the outside when the stairs go up. But this is at the level of Kaaba, the same level of the Kaaba.
Yes, correct? This was all the same level of the Kaaba. So this entire
so that is
area,
according to the Mahdis. Okay.
Yeah. So this expansion, this entire area here is the same level of the Kaaba. And here's what's important about this. If we can, let's go back to our slides here. Because of the detailed renditions of what we have of what the masjid ended up looking like, we have redundant measurements of the masjid. So we know exactly what this masjid measured. Each wall from each corner. For example, we know from this corner of the Kaaba to this minaret, from this corner of the Kaaba to this minaret, from the Blackstone corner to the Zamzam, from Zamzam to the Maqam, and so on and so forth. So these redundant measurements, because scholars took great care and pride in recording all these details with every single expansion. And we also had, by the way, measurements from this corner of the Kaaba to the center of the Marwa, from this corner of the Kaaba to the center of the Safa. And these are all very important because here's what's amazing, subhanAllah. When you take this illustration based purely and primarily on the earliest records, and we can discuss this later. When we take those measurements and we have this illustration, maintaining the scale, here's what's amazing. During the first Saudi expansion of the Masjid, we literally have an aerial photo of that expansion. And when you take that and fit it here, it perfectly matches what we have in the records. And this is truly fascinating, and this further solidifies the detailed accuracy of those measurements. In fact, when the previous one, I'm not just talking about the walls, even each gate, the width of each gate over here is up to scale. So during the Mahdi's expansion, we know specifically by scale the width of each gate, which ones had 2 arcs, which one had 3 arcs, and which ones were simply just 1 arc, like a small door. And here's how we can use this. By the way, just one more comment. You'll notice this is the wall before the second Mahdi expansion. We know the distance, and then we know the distance that was added after the second Mahdi expansion. So this further refines and fine-tunes the path, the flood path of the original flood path and where it passed. And that's also important for other descriptions that helped us put all the puzzles together. But here's how we can use this information. I can create this based primarily on the records, such as we know that Adi ibn Khiyar of the Bani Nawfal clan, his house faced directly the Mas'a, and likewise did his cousin, also from the Bani Nawfal clan, Abu Hussein ibn Harith.
So Mas'a is the place doing Sa'i, just a quick translation now.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and the Sa'i, yes, the Sa'i. So the Mas'a area here. This Zuqaq street, basically, this small path, Zuqaq ibn Abi Hussein, also known as Zuqaq bint Qarda, the daughter of Qarda who inherited this property before it was overtaken. So this path is known, and also in the early records and narrations, that this was the starting point for someone coming from Marwa to start the jog encouraged for men. And we also have the exact distances. And these flags and markers still exist today because, it's not only during Hajj season, but throughout the year, people go for Umrah, and they're constantly performing these rituals. So maintaining exact markers for this area was very critical. We also know the Zuqaq al-Attarin, which is the path the Prophet would take from Dar Khadijah to the Masjid and back. So knowing these two things, and knowing that the gates that were added coincide, that were placed directly where these two paths were, here's what we can do. We can take this information, cross-checked historical records against an aerial photograph and the exact measurements. We have a list of various sketches of the Haram, each with its own scale throughout the history. And you can see these two gates. And from putting all that together, we end up knowing exactly how wide this property was that faced the Kaaba. So we're looking at 24 meters of this property is the face of this property that faced the Kaaba. The Mas'a. And that's really a high level of resolution that we can achieve. And we can achieve even a higher level of resolution than this. And what I'm about to go to next, perhaps was shocking to me when I found out. I can tell you with certainty or great confidence that the property of Sibah bin Abdul Uzza of the Khuza'a was exactly 825.6 square meters. Now, someone listening to this might think, well, if they don't know me, they might think, is this guy lying? Is he just, messing with us? But once you know the secret, then it's no longer a mystery. First of all, who is Sibah bin Abdul Uzza? Sibah bin Abdul Uzza was an ally of the Quraysh. He lived in Mecca as an ally of the Quraysh. His tribe is Khuza'a. And he participated with them in the fight and the battles against the Muslims. He was killed in the Battle of Uhud by Hamza, radiallahu anh, the Prophet's uncle. This was before Hamza was martyred in the same battle. So how can I state such an incredible detail? First of all, we know that the entire property from the records was absorbed during the Mahdi's first expansion. We also know how much the Mahdi paid completely, specifically just for this property. So we know it was 43,000 dinars paid specifically for this entire property as compensation when they purchased it for that expansion. And then we also know that the Mahdi, from other records, paid specifically 25 dinars per square cubit. And I have an entire research to reconfirm again and again that the cubit meant in those early records is the one that measured 48 centimeters. And subhanAllah, this is a level of resolution that I never expected was possible. And this is why we can reach certain high levels of resolution and be very confident with our assessments. And there's so many other analytical tools that we can also apply. And at this point, I just want to thank everybody for their interest in this topic, which I'm very passionate about. And inshallah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Wow, Jazakallah. And this video that you just showed at the end, is this, people can get access to this through SierraMaps.com?
Yes, we're trying to develop a lot of these interactive worlds and try to provide this for people through different methodologies. You know, some museums might want to purchase them. Maybe they want to buy an interactive map. Others might be universities or people who access Sierra Maps to use it as a teaching tool in schools and universities. They can have something more engaging. And of course, from this, a lot of other ideas can come about. So let me go ahead and I think I stopped sharing the screen now. Is that correct?
Yep. So we have a few questions. I have some of my own questions. People are very interested. They're loving the fact that we can see this, and I'm loving it. I mean, I just like seeing the old map of Kaaba and Mecca before all the expansions, to be honest. It's so... could you show us, one person's asking exactly where the house of Hani is?
Yes.
On your map, if you can. And because then there's the narrations that the Prophet went for Isra and Miraj from her house, and as we know, some from the Kaaba.
Yeah, sure. So let me go ahead and share because we want to see this. I'm sure I'd want to see it. So I can actually use this map. I don't have to go. If I can just remove some of these expansions. There's a lot of maps to choose from, by the way. It's just I'm just because this is readily available. So this is Dar Hanet over here. This is Dar Hanet, and this is the well on her property. Yeah. And this was more of a public well, and her property in Fana Dar Hanet, basically the backyard of Hanet, began the Hazwara market and extended all the way up to here. And this is where we have.
What's the Hazwara market, if you can tell us about that?
Yeah, the Hazwara market is basically the most prominent market in Mecca at the time. It's where one would go to see and be seen. That's where people would buy and purchase all sorts of various different products. So that's the main market in Mecca at the time. And let me see if I can show you a better rendition of this. No, not this. Let me see. Marcus and Wells. No. Where are we? Yeah, but you already saw where
while you're bringing that up, so the house was not only close to the market that you just mentioned, it was also very close to the Kaaba as well.
Yes, it's very close to the center of the Haram area. So let me go ahead and just do this at full screen. Let me make it silent. So yeah, the markets in Mecca at the time were as follows. Very interesting to see here. So this was the Hazwara market. You can see it highlighted here.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Another interesting market is over here, is the sheep market. And you can see it at ground level. You can zoom in and zoom out if you wish. So this is the sheep market. This is the entrance from the north. And you follow that to the heart of the Mecca. So that's just one of the... I'm glad you asked this question because I think these visuals are very entertaining to use.
So if north is to the right of this map, which is where Medina is, where did the Prophet ﷺ enter Mecca on the conquest? Out of curiosity, my own personal curiosity.
Oh, that's a fascinating topic. That's actually quite a long topic. He entered from the north. The Prophet himself.
He entered from the north. He himself entered from the north, did he?
Yes.
Okay. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Wow. Well, thank you for showing this. So Hani's house is quite close. Yes. We have another question. Can you comment on the significance of Jabal al-Thabir, which is the Hayy al-Ghassala, opposite of Jabal al-Hira? Was there any houses of companions in this area in the northeast of Mecca?
So Thabir, I know why they're asking. This probably is an individual who's well aware of different issues. There's more than one Thabir. And one of them, there's a lot of confusion. For example, you have Thabir al-Zinj to the west, south of the Haram. And there's several Thabirs. So when people say a Thabir, it's, in some cases, the records don't always specify which Thabir they're talking about. And if we were going to get into this, that's a whole different topic we can get into.
Okay. Well, mashallah, I can see you can dive into the details, but it could be we could get. They've also asked. They've said Thabir al-Athbira. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it. I'm going off the English letters. Thabir al-Athbira.
The Athbira is a plural Thabir. So I'm not sure which one he's talking about specifically, because the records also, in one of the Thabirs, they call it by two different names. And then they call one of these names another Thabir. So there's a bit confusion in the records, and I address this in great detail in the book. But this is honestly a topic, if we get into, I'm going to have to open so many maps. There's a lot of background that needs to be covered.
Maybe we need to invite you for a second session, Ustadana.
I'd be happy to do this.
This is beautiful. Currently in the east of Mecca, the same person was asking, the Mecca Haram borders, there is an area that is called Al-Sharia that is at the house of several mountains, at the base of several mountains. Al-Sharia, including the highest mountain, Jabal al-Tariqi.
Okay, now they're talking outside the valley. So looking at the greater Mecca. So greater Mecca boundaries are much bigger than just a specific valley. And I focus primarily on this valley because that's been served in a lot of other books. There's a lot of experts who talk about the greater geography of Mecca, where different mountains, but the inside, the high resolution, that wasn't available before. Like nobody.
So Jabal Hira falls in the outside of.
Jabal Hira, yeah, Jabal Hira is outside. So if you exit through the north, you take a U-turn. It turns right through Thaniya al-Ulya. And then it takes a turn to the right, as if you're going back down towards Mount Arafah. But as soon as you turn, if you don't go back down, continue straight, in just a few minutes you'll see Mount Hira in front of you. In fact, let me see if I can show it to you, but that's going to just take time to take that map out.
No, that's okay. So when you have done this much research, when you go for Umrah, when you're in Mecca, how do you feel? What's going through your mind?
It's really fascinating. I mean, it's a different feeling. I mean, I went there before and I was taken back, and you're in shock and awe of the place, and you feel the presence of what you're doing, and you're trying to do the rituals. But after that, when you're sitting down, you're looking around. What do you imagine? What I imagined before, like 15 years ago, like if I visit the site, is completely different when I see now. It's like I can almost see it live. Like as I'm walking, I'm like, oh, this is where this market was. This is where the boundary began, the beginning of Dar al-Nadwa, right in front of the Kaaba. And you know how many meters away from the Kaaba was Dar Asad bin Abdul Uzza, the patriarch of the Bani Asad. He was actually the closest house to the Kaaba. In fact, during the noon and afternoon, the shadow of the Kaaba and this house would interchangeably reach the other. So that's one of the properties that Umar al-Khattab removed because it had infringed on the Tawaf area. It's a really fascinating topic to go there and see it.
You know, I would love to see if you could go to the Kaaba now and you could put on these goggles, so when you're walking around it, you're seeing the original. If there can be a project that does that, and
yes,
then you can see that would be amazing. You can walk around it yet still.
Yes, exactly. At Sira Maps, we feel a lot of pressure, and I do too, because people have rightfully said that they want to have access to this. There should be an app. There should be goggles that we can use, augmented reality, and all of these things. We're working on them, and obviously it's very costly. So we're able now to at least provide these interactive maps at the first step. And once we're completed with that, and we have several more maps to now publish. We did the mountains and valleys, markets and wells, the cemeteries, the entrances, the main entrances into the valley, and then we're going to add the property. And then after that, we're going to do more of a complete full map that hopefully can be accessible through an app or something. But these things take a lot of effort and energy.
At Isra, we had a Risala symposium 2 years ago, and Sira Maps was a partner, and we had some of your massive maps on stage. And so people could see that. That was very interesting. So when is your book going to be published? They're asking. People are keen to know.
Well, I know. So no author is going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you, don't buy the current book that's outside, because although it's It's been highly recommended and people really like it. The second edition is multiple times more detailed. So there's just a few minor issues that were fixed in the first edition, but then the second edition is now 2 volumes and it's multiple times more detailed. I mean, we went from just 82 properties or 80 something properties to over 200 properties.
So this is the second edition of your original book, right?
Yes, this is the second edition of the original book, and now it's grown to two, and that should be out. It's basically 99% done, and it should be, depending on how long book design takes, hopefully by the end of the year, it should be available, inshallah.
But the 5-volume book, that's a separate thing, the Sira book?
No, that's a separate thing. That's so I've completed volume 1, 2, and 3. Volume 1 and 2 alone have been going on editing now for several years, and that's just volume 1 and 2. And volume 1, if you can believe it, the entirety of volume 1 is prior to the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we go really in depth into the history and how humanity ended up in the position it was just at the point where the Prophet ﷺ was born. Volume 2 is the entirety of the Meccan era, starting with the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, ending with the migration. And then volume 3 is the first 4 years in Medina, and so on. So inshallah.
And these books are in Arabic or in English you study?
Well, I'm sure since this is in English, actually people will be happy to know that they're in English.
Great.
Yeah, and the reason the Mecca book initially came out in English and will be translated into Arabic and all sorts of different languages is because I initially wanted to do it in English, thinking that I'm going to add something of value that is not currently available in English. And now I realized I reached a point where actually I'm adding so much extra value and detail and resolution that this needs to be in Arabic also because it's not available.
MashaAllah. Now, study about your sources, if I can go down to that. I mean, there's more interesting questions come, but I want to also ask my own question. Like you had numbers around Dar Khadijah's house. Okay, it's based on these excavations, I'm assuming. But what if someone says, okay, these excavations were done by the Abbasids, Umayyad, years later? And how do we know that? What are the sources that we have? What else are you relying on?
That's an important question, and I'm always expecting to be asked this question because sources are very important. And here, let me go ahead and share my screen again. If we can.
I mean, it's really interesting. I can see people by you accessing you and in this discussion, and they're accessing the literature, but also through the visuals, they almost feel like they just want you to show us the pictures and take us back there. You know, really, it's going back.
If I can have the screen shown again.
Yeah, there we go. Yes.
So one of the most important sources, in fact, it's this one. So it's a 2-volume work by Abu al-Walid al-Azraqi. And if you can see here, this is the Tarikh or Akhbar Makkah, depending on the publisher print. So Tarikh Makkah by Abu al-Walid al-Azraqi. This is a grandfather-grandson author team. So the elder was Abu al-Walid Ahmed, and the grandson was Abu al-Walid Muhammad. And you can see how early this was. And even more important than how early this was is who these individuals were. Not only are they scholars, but they are the most well-positioned individuals to actually know these details. So look at their property here. Let me go ahead and do this. This is where Al-Azraq lived. So Al-Azraqi is based on, Al-Azraqi comes from their grandfather, Al-Azraq, who was a companion. He lived in Mecca as an ally of the Quraysh. This was his property. They had a big problem when Abdullah bin Zubair purchased half of their property for his expansion. And they had a problem trying to get their money because he sent them to his brother, and there was an issue there. But we're talking about people who are original inhabitants of Mecca from that time period. You're talking about the grandsons talking about their own backyard. So not only are they scholars and historians, but they're literally living in Mecca, and their grandfather, Al-Azraq, was a companion, and this is exactly where his property. You're talking about someone who lived right next to the Kaaba, and his grandchildren are writing these sources. After the source comes Al-Fakihi and Al-Fasi, who basically took Al-Azraqi's work and expanded upon it. They wanted to add even more details. So they included most of the narrations from Al-Azraqi, and added their own narrations and ended up with, like, in this case, for example, Akhbar Makkah here is 5 volumes. He took this and turned it into 5 volumes. And so on and so forth. Another very important sources we're talking about the lineage sources. So the lineage of Quraysh and how these people are related to each other, the division of the tribe, and effects. And a lot of these books also mention what happened to them, the households. You'll find someone living somewhere which it doesn't make sense. But then you realize, oh, he married, his wife is from that other clan. She had no brothers. So when she inherited the land and then she died, his children inherited. And that's why we have someone from a different clan's area living in there. And this is important. Here's what I want to point out. The two most authoritative books on the lineage of Quraysh are by Mus'ab Zubairi and his nephew Zubair bin Bakkar. Who are these individuals? Not only are they Meccan, the grandfather, the great grandfather is Abdullah bin Zubair, who was a companion, an original Meccan, and who became caliph, and his capital of his caliphate was literally Mecca itself. So you're talking about like very early generations writing, and when you're talking about lineage works, like if you can't believe how extremely vigilant Arabs are about their lineage books. So for two people to be considered the authorities on a specific topic, so you know that everybody else is trying to really be trying their best to criticize this work and found it to be very accurate. So that's just something about, and there's a long
There
list
must
of
be
other.
something about the Abdullah bin Zubayr family, because Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was also known for his specialty knowing the nasabs, right, of the Arabs.
Yes, there were several. Hakim bin Hizam was also one of them. Excuse me, who else? There were several of them, but the most popular at the time of the Prophet was Abdullah Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh.
So in a way, it's inherited knowledge, in a way, you could say, in that family.
Yeah. Yes, people were always very vigilant about, I guess I can stop sharing the screen now. So people were always very vigilant about these details. And like I said, these early records, like Al-Azraqi, specifically measured the measurements, specifically noted who lived where and what, specifically noted the expansions and what they affected, what the material was used, where they brought this material was the wood and the marble brought from Sham, from the Levant? Was it brought from elsewhere? Did they ship some wood from India? And all these details are meticulously recorded. And these people are very serious about this history. So people think that these are later records. Like I said, I'm showing you people who are original inhabitants of Mecca from the relevant time period.
Wow, this is fascinating. All I can say is Hal min Mazid. Is there any more? Maybe we can discuss another session, maybe someone else's house. That's perhaps what we need. We need every Sahaba should have a session of this, seeing this house, how it's connected. And I can see how as you mentioned, the nasabs are so important, the lineage, because that helps you match the maps. We just have one last question, Ustad, that they said, if you can show us where the boycott took place. I'm assuming it took place in the Bani Hashim.
That's correct, yes.
If you can just show that one last one, because there's a lot of discussion recently about the boycott.
Okay, let me go ahead and share the screen again. If I can, let me go ahead into here.
And also someone has asked the same, have you come across some inscriptions in Mecca in your research?
Yes, there's a mountain called Bank, because the lines on the mountain, you know, when you have marble, like there's a mountain, it's made of a specific type of rock, and these contours within it, they make letters that look like Bank. And it's mentioned in this record from, you know, over 1,000 years ago. And if you go now today, and people have a picture, and people send me a picture of it too, because when I first went, I didn't have time to visit, so I asked someone to take a picture for me. And the editor of the book himself also mentioned that, oh, by the way, I went there and I saw it and it's still there. It looks like these three letters. So they called it Jebel Bank, the mountain of Bank, based on this design, this natural design that kind of looks like these three letters. So that's something you can find there. Of course, Maqam Ibrahim is still there. But let me go ahead and share with the
boycott area.
The boycott area, images, base map. Um, there we go. So I think, is this visible now?
Yep. Yes.
If we can share the screen.
Yep. We can see it.
So this is the Beni Hashim Valley over here, if this is clear. And they boycotted themselves within this valley. So all the Muslims and the Beni Hashim took refuge, and they actually had guards at the entrance, and they basically blockaded themselves in, because this was a serious matter. The Quraysh literally wanted to kill the Prophet. They said, "Give us Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, let us kill him, and then you'll be free, you'll be fine." So they all ended up getting boycotted here, except of course Abu Lahab. So Abu Lahab he was with the pagans, so he left, and he had this estate. He most likely lived on the estate that she later gave to his son. So this is where they stayed, and it was a very difficult boycott. And in fact, one of the stories, so we know that Hamza lived on this property here. And why is this important? Because you remember that Hakim bin Hizam, who was a trader, and he traded in grains. So at one point he had all these grains and this food that he had wanted to put on a camel and basically let this camel walk into the Beni Hashim Valley. He was confronted by Abu Jahl, and they had a fight and skirmish, and then they had a big fight there. And Abu Jahl was hit in the head with a camel stick. So who saw this event? It was Hamza radiallahu anhu. And he went back and reported, and Abu Jahl felt horrible, because he knew that now, the Muslims will hear that Abu Jahl was hit in the head, with a camel stick, and it was an insult to him, and he didn't want people to know this. But this is the valley in which they were boycotted.
And that makes sense from the value of the map, because Sayyidina Hamza's house is right at the front.
Yes, yes.
Did they have a way of escaping into the mountains and seeking food, or was it too hard and too rugged?
They did. I mean, you can always skirmish your way out, but for what purpose? You're talking about a time period where, if you want to punish someone, you exile them from the city. What are they going to do? You have no water, you have no shelter, you can't walk on your foot for all these days. Although, subhanAllah, Ali radiallahu anh, mashallah, he migrated on foot all the way to Medina. When he got there, his feet were in a horrible state. But you don't want to be out alone. So there's security numbers. You don't want to be caught alone outside, and then by the Quraysh, and being attacked. And it was more of a solidarity issue. So they did during this time period, probably go up into the mountains a bit and gather, because we know they ate the leaves of trees when they got really desperate. And sometimes, like, their closest of kin would help them out. Like we said, Hakim bin Hizam, even before he became Muslim, he did this because obviously his auntie was Khadijah RA, and he was against this harsh cruelty against the Muslims. But he was still with the pagans, so and eventually the boycott ended after 3 very difficult years.
Okay, Ustadi, Jazakallah khair for this beautiful presentation.
Alhamdulillah, barakallah feek. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is a topic I'm obviously very passionate about, and always happy to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely, inshallah. I can imagine one day we organize a Hajj and Umrah tour for Sydney or Australia, and we ask you to lead us, inshallah, into it.
Inshallah. Even better yet, you'll have access to an app that everybody can use.
Inshallah. Naam. Bushra lana. Jazakallah khair, Ustad. Thank you very much. We look forward to having you, hosting you again at Isra. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Inshallah, we can come back for another session, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana. Alhamdulillah.